Hello, and welcome to our presentation on how to start your InfoSec career. On behalf of BreakPoint Labs, myself, Zach Myers, Andrew McNichol, and Lucas Hudson will be presenting today. So, with this presentation, we have a basic agenda, and I'll kind of give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to basically cover who BreakPoint Labs is and move into various different overview of what we're going to be covering as a jump start into getting in the InfoSec career. We're also going to talk about various different platforms of information and various social media things you could do, tips for skill development, so trying to teach you various tools, techniques, and procedures that we've learned over the years. We're also going to talk about the importance of trying to find a mentor, having an educational background, and pursuing certifications in the InfoSec realm. We'll also talk about the 85-70 requirements if you've got a Department of Defense job. And we'll also talk about the difference in InfoSec with Department of Defense jobs versus the commercial realm. We'll also talk then further about professional networking and how you can obtain additional knowledge and various different things in the InfoSec career. We'll also talk about the importance of networking, Linux, and learning a scripting language such as Python, and give you two use cases from an offensive perspective and a defensive perspective that are very real world, so you can kind of understand what you would do in a day-to-day job. We'll also finish up everything with how practice makes perfect, and give you a brief recap with some useful links as well that you can look over in your own free time. So we are BreakPoint Labs. We started in 2015, and we basically provide technical services on the federal side as well as the commercial side. We pride ourselves in our geeky culture and trying to always advance with different cyber challenges and critical infrastructure, as well as other networks, and we provide various different services. As you see here, we do training, research and development, cyber operations, and cybersecurity assessments. Like I said, we really do embrace the geeky culture. We try to engage with the InfoSec community, whether it's through blogs, social media, GitHub, conferences, and we really do put a large focus on learning and sharing our information and knowledge, because that's what it's all about in this field. We also like to do capture the flag events and other technical challenges to improve our skill and also to present and give out to the community. So this presentation, like I said, is to kind of jumpstart you into an InfoSec career. So let's get started. The goal of this presentation is for us to share our lessons learned and to kind of move you forward into the industry. The key to success will always be a continuous effort of learning and improving your skill when it comes to this job. The industry will require not only knowledge of terms, but also hands-on experience, what we like to call hands-on the keyboard experience, to succeed. And ultimately, this field is adapting and changing constantly. So the biggest component is always being aware and keeping yourself up to date to be a true InfoSec professional. So there's various different platforms of information that you can leverage to kind of keep yourself aware and alert. One of the best ones I find is Twitter. I have my own special Twitter account that I just use with my own handle for InfoSec. That way you can kind of have all the best resources and follow a lot of the leading professionals and companies, vendors, whatnot on Twitter and keep current with news that's going on in our field. Often people will report via tweet, a blog post, or various different things as they're coming in real time. Maybe it's a 0-day vulnerability, or Patch Tuesday just came out for the month. Just various different truly important things that you can learn, and you can truly build a network that way. Moving on, another great thing is blogs. We read blogs all the time. So a blog, people were just basically sharing their ideas, lessons learned, discovering new topics. It's a great way to kind of basically read and obtain knowledge, and also you can learn from it and try and replicate it. So a lot of times people will put screenshots and write-ups and tutorials through blogs, and it's a great thing that you can bookmark, go to, visit on a regular basis, and even sometimes you can listen to it via a podcast. And then a kind of a combination of the two is an RSS feed. If you want to kind of have like that real-time Twitter with a little bit of snippets of people just saying a sentence or so, while also getting a blog, you could use Dig, Feedly, whatever you want to use as your RSS feeder, and it can also help you keep track of news items. So one other thing that we always like to say, besides just being current and knowing and reading, is improving your hands-on-the-keyboard skills. So some of our tips is always to build a lab, and when we say build a lab, a lot of people get discouraged, but don't be discouraged. Honestly, it's not that bad. In order to improve your technical skills, you should try and basically take your laptop or your, and from there install VirtualBox or VMware and install virtual machines and play around with different operating systems, various different frameworks and tools to kind of get yourself up to speed. And there's various different tutorials online that you could totally follow. Another thing you could totally do is a capture the flag exercise. Whether you download a capture the flag VM or you go to some kind of conference or some kind of event that has hosting a capture the flag event, they're all over the place. A great resource online you could do from home to obtain some technical skills is just download a VM from VulnHub. VulnHub has a lot of resources where there's vulnerable virtual machines that are, if you want to do the offensive approach, or where you could try and attack that VM, or there's also vulnerable VMs where you could try and harden it from a defensive perspective. So various different things. Another good resource you could also look at for events, if you ever want to just obtain one in person, is the Trail of Bits GitHub. Then there's also free training and online resources. You can find a lot of different things of conference talks from the past on Iron Geek's YouTube channel. There's also a lot of free training resources for certification training, skill training through Cyber IT's website, as well as Offensive Security has a Unleashed Metasploit course that you could always look into if you want to learn an offensive approach. So one of the biggest things is to possibly find a mentor. If you can, knowing somebody in the field or following somebody in the field and just reaching out to them is a truly powerful thing, because then they can point you in the right direction, give you advice, and also teach you their lessons learned. And this ties into, education. Education is truly important. Without a doubt, if you can, if you're currently studying something or you are thinking about going and doing some educational, skill development, try to do computer science. As programming skills are highly demanded right now, we see in the industry, but you'll learn how to write your own scripts and code, and it'll also separate you from everyone else. If you do not have a computer science degree, don't be afraid. It's not a big deal, because it's not going to make or break you with writing code. Anyone can learn it. Anyone can do it on their own free time. But that's just a nice little skill to have. It definitely does separate you from everyone else. Some jobs will require you to have coding ability, and some will not. So it's really a mixed bag in this field. If you absolutely don't see yourself doing code, that's fine. Just make sure that you have other skills elsewhere. This can be a good thing that you want to invest in for sure, as education is truly, really valued, not only in the Department of Defense jobs and government jobs, but also in commercial realm as well. It can definitely help you possibly skip some lower level IT roles such as help desk or system admin roles and get you into that next mid-level position. Also, with the education, having hands-on skills is truly important, because in college, most of the time you'll learn all these terms and different things like that and by the book, but you never get any really hands-on experience. So getting that hands-on experience labbing is really going to help you push you to the next step.
Alrighty, and this kind of brings us into the next topic, which is kind of it could be used in place of a degree, but oftentimes it's more of a complement to a degree, and that's certifications. Now, there are tons and tons and tons of different organizations that you can go to get a certification from. You'll see a lot of different entry-level security certifications, such as Security Plus or Linux Plus from companies like CompTIA, and then you can start to get into some more advanced stuff like offensive security and SANS. Um, Overall, I would say that a certification is not a replacement for skill, but it can be used to meet requirements of a job. For example, on our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the DoD requirements there. It can be used as a showcase about your knowledge on a particular topic, though, again, that does not replace actual hands-on experience in that topic. And overall, they can also be resume boosters. Some of our recommendations for places that you should look for certifications if you are interested in doing that. You have the CompTIA program, which is good for meeting requirements. It's good as an entry-level cert. Maybe you've never taken a cert before. Maybe you're trying to meet some requirements. Security Plus is probably a good place to start. Then you have stuff like the SANS and the offensive security. Now, these are definitely more advanced, and they're a little bit different in the way that you take them. You have the SANS certs, which are they are still written tests. They're multiple choice exams. They're 75 to 150 questions. The passing percentage varies wildly depending on the topic, but they have the broadest coverage of security topics, and they even actually all roll into a education curriculum for a master's degree that they've recently been accredited to deliver. And then lastly, we have offensive security, which is actually more of a hands-on certification program. The way that they're set up is that they have educational materials to teach you some of the basics of the topics, and then they focus on skill development and then actual hands-on testing of that skill. They have full lab environments for you to practice the skills, and then their actual exam is a skills-based exam where you have a certain amount of time to achieve a certain number of actual tasks. In addition to these companies, there's other organizations. A lot of people may have heard of ISC Squared. They offer the CISP certification. You have places like Microsoft, Cisco, Red Hat, etc. The certifications that you're going to want to look at will depend very, very highly on your specific career goals. For example, if you're going into help desk, that'll affect what you get. If you're going into networking, that'll affect it. If you're going into network traffic analysis and so on, that'll really impact what you're getting. I mentioned briefly on the last slide the DoD requirements. Now, the main requirement the Department of Defense operates under is DoD 8570. Now, the way this works is every job role is going to have required IAT levels and IAM levels. Now, you'll see here we have the IAT level 1, 2, 3, and then IAM level 1, 2, 3. And then there's actually individual job role requirements. So the way it works is you'll have to get certain certifications to meet certain requirements. For example, Security Plus meets your IAT level 2, and then if you were a C&D auditor, you could get CEH or CISA or whatever to meet those requirements. Really what you're going to want to focus on there is figure out what role are you trying to move into. If it's a DoD role, how does that align with the 8570 requirements? And that'll show you what your minimum baseline of certifications is going to be. So a common question that we get is, what are some of the differences between working in the DoD versus a commercial environment? Now, I'll get those questions from people who have never worked in either environment. I'll get those questions from people who are in a commercial environment wanting to move DoD, and I've gotten those questions from people who have solely worked DoD. Now, there is a lot of overlap in terms of the type of work that you're going to be doing and that sort of thing. It's just going to be how that work is delivered. It's going to be the main difference. For example, in the DoD, you'll see a big mixture of government civilians and contractors, maybe even multiple sets of contractors working together, all in the same environment, maybe even under the same roof. They focus really heavily on policies and compliance and separation of information. The best example of that is classified versus unclassified information or work. You'll usually require some sort of public trust or clearance. At a minimum, at least an extensive background check. Usually the infrastructure that you'll be working on is separate from the public internet. It's on DoD-specific networks, such as the NIPR, the DoD Information Network, and so on. And then the way the contractor roles work is it's based upon bids on government work that's available, and that can affect the stability of the job. You'll have a contract available for a certain amount of time, and then have to go through rebids, or contracts can be transferred, and so on. In the commercial environment, usually you're hired directly for a company as an employee under that company, working specifically on work for that company, rather than working for a company executing work for a different organization. They do focus on compliance and regulations, though the difference there is that it's focusing more on third-party organizations that are industry recognized rather than government requirements. Usually they'll be focusing a little bit less on the policy enforcement, depending on who you're working with, and more often on the delivery of the work. And usually won't require a clearance unless that company is really focusing on government work, and that would fall more into the contractor realm. So this brings us to a little bit about how to network professionally. Now, there are a lot of good resources for this. Number one, LinkedIn. Build a LinkedIn, set up your profile. It's basically your online resume, and it'll really give you that online professional profile. So if people start searching for you, you submit your resume somewhere. When I'm filling a role, and I start getting resumes, that's one of the first things I'll do is I'll look at someone's LinkedIn, see who they're connected with, see what they've done, etc. It's just a more robust version of your resume. Twitter is another great resource. It helps you stay active in the security community. It helps you keep up to date in news. If you've got a Twitter and I see that you're tweeting industry news, you're following big juggernauts in the industry, then I'll know that you're up to date on what's going on, versus someone who has never looked at Twitter and it only looks at news aggregation sites and that sort of thing. They're usually a little bit more behind the times. Running a personal blog is a great way to get information out there. Writing blog articles, reblogging stuff from other people, that sort of thing is a great way to share knowledge, show some of the skills you have, and show some of the research that you've been doing. Working on open source projects, such as anything on GitHub or SourceForge and so on, it's really great to help develop skills and just show that you're involved in the community. Contributing to an open source project is really a great way to get noticed by companies. When I'm looking at someone for a role and I see that they're contributing to open source products, it really helps me get a feel for some of the work they've done, and actually I can go through and look at code and that sort of thing that they've done. And lastly, attending conferences is really a great way to kind of meet people in the industry. It's a great way to see what kind of big stuff is coming out that hasn't been posted to blog sites and so on, and really just get more knowledge in person. So one of the big questions I get pretty frequently is what are some of the baseline skills that I need to learn to get into this industry? Now, before you start looking at what certification should I get, what's my first job role, this, that, and the other, you'll have to develop some baseline skills. One of the first things that I recommend to people is to start getting a feel for basic networking. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who have this certification and that certification. They have all kinds of stuff on their resume. They worked at help desk, they worked at this job, and they're ready for that next role. And then you start talking to them about networking, and they don't understand the difference between internal and external IP addresses. It just goes to show how out of touch they are with some of the important pieces that are going to be involved in the job. And when you start talking about network security, networking is a big piece of it. The next thing that I recommend to people is just start getting comfortable with Linux. When I first started getting my foot in the door in this industry, I was not comfortable with Linux. I was a Windows guy. I had done Windows help desk. I had done this, that, and the other. I just did not have that level of familiarity with Linux that I really needed. The further I got into my career, the more I realized I was missing out. I was lacking skills that I really genuinely needed to do my job. The number one thing I say is, get rid of Windows if possible. Just completely remove it from your laptop, throw Linux on there, and start using it. Start doing everything you can from the command line. Start getting more comfortable with taking a more technical approach to things. And then next up would be Python. Now, we recommend Python specifically because it's great to start learning how to do some sort of coding or scripting. It helps you understand how things work a little bit better, how the different pieces of software that you're using work a little bit better. I would say learning a coding language or a scripting language will take you from just someone who's an enthusiast about security, who likes the idea of security, to someone who's really, really involved with doing the technical pieces of it. Oftentimes, when I'm hiring for a role, I can have someone come in and they'll tell me all the right things. They'll tell me they're interested in the right stuff, they've done the right stuff, and then I'll start talking to them about coding. They'll have no experience in it, they'll have no interest in it, and a lot of times that's okay for some roles, but it really goes to show me that they aren't really willing to take their skills to the next level. So it's definitely an important area to start focusing on. You definitely don't need to be a developer or the craziest coder out there, but having some sort of ability to automate a task or write a simple script like the one you see here is really definitely important in terms of overall skill development.
All right, thanks, Luke. This is Andrew. I'm going to be covering kind of some of the use cases we mentioned in the agenda. We're going to talk about taking a look at an offensive job and a defensive job. I think this is really important as we've discussed some of the ways to get noticed and build skill. I hope this gives you an idea of kind of what the jobs are like, so you kind of have a better idea of what you want to do. So the pen tester route, this is what everybody wants to do. Like anybody you talk to, they want to be like the hacker on the keyboard. It's what everybody wants when they first hear about security. But I got to tell you, it's not what everybody's good at, and it's not what everybody wants to do after they've been exposed to it. Pen testing is all about failure. I mean, I'm talking failing over and over again, and then just not giving up. And that can be a hard thing to deal with. There are a lot of people that don't want a think outside the box, creative thinking, no guaranteed end solution to what you're trying to solve, not knowing a structured path to the answer. That's pen testing. You gotta think creatively. There's not always the answer there available to you. Sometimes you have to figure it out. It's definitely not for everybody, and you got to be used to failure. It also takes a lot of research. So facing a new type of technology, which you'll undoubtedly do because you just can't know everything. I can't tell you how many times I've gone on an assessment, I've had to like research, pull up, admin guides on the fly, knowing that I've got hours to assess the technology. You just got to do it. I mean, over time, you build a deeper level of knowledge across stuff, but you just can't know everything. So researching on the fly is required. And then I also find that I've got to put a lot of time into skill development. I've got to actually sharpen my skills outside of work still. After having done it for 5.5 years, I still have to kind of go out and sharpen skills and learn new technologies and new tools and new TTPs, and then also staying up to date on the latest vulnerabilities and attacks. I mean, I can't tell you how many times a new vuln comes out. You've got to analyze it, you got to dig through it so you can evaluate it in the next pen test or maybe for your current customers. And then there's also a different way of thinking. Like you got to think like an attacker. Think of how to misuse technology in creative ways. So it's definitely like thinking like a bad guy. Like you walk into a store and you start to notice where the cameras are in the store. Yeah, you got to start to think like where are the blind spots in the store? Like where could somebody steal? Like that's got to be your mindset throughout technology. It's definitely looking through life at a different lens, and not everybody's set up for that. But it's definitely an interesting thing. Scripting, so that's kind of a hard requirement for senior roles. You're either gonna go the manager route, which really isn't pen testing, or you're going to be the senior pen tester, and then that's going to require you to be scripting. So if you're not learning a scripting language, Python, etc., you're limiting yourself, and you're really not going to reach your full potential, or even, in my opinion, a decent pen tester is going to be able to write some scripts. Here are some tools that you'll leverage in pen testing. This is a subset, but you'll find yourself leveraging exploitation frameworks like Metasploit, maybe Core Impact. Burp Suite Professional is going to be a bread and butter tool for web testing. Then you have your network scanners like Nmap and Masscan. Masscan is really cool, by the way. Definitely check it out. ReconNG for automating reconnaissance. Jason Haddix has like an enum all script to get you started, which is kind of nice. Then you have Linux and Windows. You need to know them both because you're going to be running into both of them. Leveraging Nessus as like a network vulnerability scanner. Akinetics, Web Inspect. There's some additional web scanners. You have Mimikatz, Python, and then many other tools in Kali Linux. This is just kind of a subset to give you like an idea of some of the tools you might run into this in the day job. So this is a big thing for Zach. Zach loves this this little meme here. So the world needs bad men. So why do you have pen testers? Because we keep the other bad men from the door. So when I say that, you've got to be the bad guy that finds the issue before the real bad guy does, and help prevent that ultimately from being exploited in a malicious way. And that's kind of our goal as pen testers, is to seek out what isn't obvious, to seek out what's not showing up in a Nessus scan or a burp scan, or not being fed you by an automated tool, and figure out how to misuse that technology creatively. So I think you're going to best understand this through an example. So on a pen test, I once was basically starting out with a company name, and I started out by doing some basic reconnaissance using Google, ReconNG, other IP and domain research tools like Domain Dossier, and essentially started to map out that organization. What's their IP space? What's their domain? What domain names do they have? That sort of thing. Basic reconnaissance. And then I also leveraged Shodan and some Python. So this is an example of me writing a Python script that automates something and saves me time because it's just required. You've got to be able to automate a lot where you can. So Python, there's a little script here that basically takes in a domain name and gives you back what is externally facing. Because Shodan essentially is a service online that basically is constantly scanning the internet and then indexing that data for you. So this is an example of me within seconds grabbing out the domains that are there, CEDAR ranges, and the actual systems and their corresponding ports and services that are exposed to the internet. And Google was used as an example. My target organization was obviously different, but this is just showing you kind of the next step is I'll check Shodan out after I've started to map out their domain and IP space. I'll see what does Shodan know about it. There's also census.io, which is another resource that does the same thing. And then I'm moving into I'm validating some of the Nmap results, and I'm going into it a little deeper. I'm going to use mass scan. Mass scan's real quick, real fast. You can scan across a /16 for a couple ports in seconds. It's crazy. It's crazy fast. It's awesome. Nmap would have taken maybe like a half hour to 45 minutes, depending on the options you've chosen. But these are some basic syntax I'll use for mass scan and Nmap. And then I'll use WhatWeb to get an idea of the technology footprint. It will actually go through and grab from the URLs I enumerated and tell me the technology breakdown, which is very helpful. And then another side note here, just to give you an example of where you're using your skills. We talked about Python before. When I'm going in between these tools, Masscan, Nmap, and WhatWeb, I'm using grep, sed, awk, egrep, sort, unique, all the sort of Linux utilities to parse the output of one tool to go to the input of another. And that's kind of where Linux comes into play. Like, you've got to be able to really quickly parse this tool, because I'm talking about an organization that might have hundreds of thousands of systems. So you can't do these things by hand. You've got to be able to find ways to automate, and Linux utilities are just an invaluable way when you start to move between tools and you need to parse the data in quick ways. So the next thing is I've done my enumeration. I found their web servers, and I stumble upon a web server. Now, when you talk about web server hacking or pen testing, one of the things you're going to want to look for is to enumerate the application and then properly map that application. And you do that through what's called linked content enumeration and unlinked content enumeration. When you talk about linked content, you're thinking about spidering. This is what's going to crawl the page and go to all the things the website tells you about. So everything that's tied in the application. That's easy to enumerate. Spiders basically follow the href links and other links on the page, and they tell you everything that's there that they can see. Then you have unlinked stuff, which is usually very interesting. It's basically what's not tied in the application, but it's still there. You kind of have to guess. You have to use brute force techniques. There's a lot of lists out there, like the RAF list, FuzzDB, sec list, robots disallowed. A lot of projects out there in GitHub that basically maintain lists of hundreds of thousands of resources to request, whether they be directories or resources like this, debug.php, and then they just see if they're there. They look at the HTTP status code. So I'm running into one server, and I found an unlinked resource called debug.php. It gives me back an HTTP 200OK status code and a blank screen. Now, I'm showing you this because this is a very important example, because this is where your automated tools will commonly stop. They're going to basically show you this blank screen. They're not going to know what to do from here necessarily. They might tell you the PHP version in the server header, and they're like, great, PHP version, cool. You may research some vulns, but that might not take you anywhere. In this instance, once you find an unlinked resource, the next thing you want to do is also understand and try to figure out the inputs for this resource, because one of the things web applications leverage are what are called parameters, and they take in input from the user, and then they essentially allow you to generate dynamic content or interact with the application in some way that could lead to a vulnerability. So that's the next step. is I'm essentially going to fuzz the parameters. So if you look in your URL before, you may have seen a question mark, something equals. That's a parameter. And I'm looking for what parameters does this particular debug.php accept. So I went ahead and used Burp's Intruder, which is a tool in Burp that lets you do a bunch of requests, iterating over like a list. And essentially I defined the option, the parameter as the thing that's going to be iterating over. And I'm checking for all these common parameters. So I'm checking for like load, login, whatever. And I found out that page, that parameter gave back a length of 633, whereas everything else was 193 every time. So that was interesting because the length was different, right? So there's something else. It's generating a different response. I'm going to investigate that further. So I go over to the GUI, and I see attempting to debug test. And it says, warning, include test, function include, failed to open stream. This is getting very interesting. Now, if you're new to PHP or you're new to web hacking, you probably don't know what this means, but we're unearthing a pretty critical file inclusion vulnerability that's going to lead to code execution. We're going to kind of show you how here. So what we're doing here is we took the debug.php page equals, and if you see in the burp request here, I'm actually having a page equals a remote resource, something that I control, that includes PHP code that I want to run. And because it was a PHP include vulnerability that we saw from the PHP warning, PHP include will actually interpret and run that code. So I'm feeding it data from an external resource, and it's running that code, which is really cool because you basically just done a remote file inclusion and leading it to remote command execution because you can run code through PHP now. And on this instance, I'm just running ID, and I basically have command access to the box of this web server. So then I leveraged Python again. Second kind of time you're running into Python in this one little scenario. I built a little web shell using the Python requests module. It's very easy. It was very similar to the screenshot we showed earlier. Very similar to write this little web shell. And I'm just iterating through, taking my input and tossing it to the server and getting the output. Very, very simple, but you can see it looks like a web shell. I mean, it is a web shell, but it looks and feels like a command. You have command access, terminal access to the box when it's really a web shell. Now, in the example I ran into in real life, the system was running, the web application was running a system on a vulnerable application. Now, if you're not familiar with how Windows works, something running a system essentially gives you full access to that operating system. It had shared admin accounts. I could dump credentials, pass the hash, and pivot throughout the organization. Basically, completely control the organization from the web application here on its internet facing. And that had been through countless scans, countless vulnerability assessment, it'd been sitting there for over a decade. Very scary stuff. And the reason that it was missed is because it wasn't pen tested. It wasn't somebody didn't go through it and try to think outside the box and be creative. And hopefully this gives you an idea of some of the steps and some of the skills and some of the things you do during a pen test. Through this example, just gives you kind of a taste of what it's like. Now switching gears here to the defensive sides. We talked about the offense, being cool hacker stuff, and you hopefully got an idea that it's not red code or it's not a bunch of flashy lights and you get in the box. That there's a lot of hard work and creative thinking involved. But now to switch gears to the defense. So from my experience, defense is a lot about digging through logs, PCAP, alerts, various tool outputs. And looking through various raw data streams and looking for what's odd. You have to have extreme attention to detail because you have to know what is an enterprise that have hundreds of thousands of computers look like legitimately. Like what are some of the DNS requests that you should see? And we're talking hundreds of thousands a second. So being able to go through that amount of data and get that level of knowledge with it, it takes some time. It does usually take like 6 months to really get an understanding of that, but that's kind of what it's like when you're digging through and hunting for evil, is you're not looking for the red code like you see on CSI Cyber. You're looking at legitimate communications and you're trying to figure out where is it odd and what can't be explained. You're essentially trying to explain communications. And one way I always suggest people do is I suggest that they explain their own communications. Dump on your own PCAP, right, and see everything your computer is sending to the internet, and try to explain it. If you can't explain it, that's something that you should be able to do, and it's a good first step in going in this direction. Something else you need to have a desire to improve. So most defensive jobs are what you make it. Offensive jobs are a little more aggressive in the sense that you have to show an outcome. You have to be able to like get into something, right? Defensive job is more or less, unless there's a denial of service, somebody can be compromised and you may just not know it, and everything is hunky-dory. Like there's nothing wrong. Like the person is just, the data's going out the door. That's bad, but there may not be a compromise to the business process, and nobody tells you, so nothing's on fire visibly. But that doesn't mean that you're doing a good job, because you might be missing this critical compromise. So it is really what you make it. You don't want to sit on Facebook and check the box. You got to dig through to go beyond your alerts, because what your tools are alerting you, much like in the offensive realm. The defensive realm, that's not going to be complete. You've got to go through the data and hunt. Scripting, again, normally required for senior roles. This doesn't go anywhere. So hopefully you get in that trend, is that if you're going to be a senior in a technical role, you've got to pick up a scripting language. It's required. Again, lots of research. If you've never looked at PCAP, when you start to, you're gonna get what I mean when I say that. You've got to be able to research and explain stuff. And if you're looking at network traffic, there's a lot to it, and it's going to require a lot of research. And then also staying ahead of the curve on the latest attacks. You got to do that too. You got to learn about the latest malware trends, latest vulnerabilities that are going to impact your system, that are going to distribute malware. It's pretty important. Some of the tools you'll leverage in this type of job is going to be TCP dump, Wireshark. These are going to help you dump and listen to raw traffic, and as well as just look at PCAP. You have your Bro and Snort. These are your intrusion detection systems and capabilities, so to speak. You have your SIM tools, which are security incident event monitoring tools. You have Python. That's not going anywhere. Python's very popular. And again, Windows and Linux, because you're going to need to use both. So I said it before, but defensive roles, you're really hunting for that needle in the haystack. You got to look for that, one SYN packet an hour, or one bad DNS request every 10 minutes. And that might not sound too bad, but when you have tremendous amount of enterprise communications, it can be an extremely daunting task, especially when it looks legitimate. A lot of things, I'm going to show you an example of where network traffic looks legitimate, but it's actually not. And they'll kind of because the bad guys use those TTPs. They use people that are thumbing through things with their eye. How can I trick the human eye? And they absolutely tie into that. So if you've never looked at PCAP before, this is what it's going to look like to you for the first time. Or the Matrix. So if you've ever seen the Matrix, so the screen blows up. But essentially, it's no joke. It's a tremendous amount of data. It's okay to feel overwhelmed at first, because if you don't feel overwhelmed looking at PCAP for the first time, I'm going to be surprised. But stay with it. It's like anything. As long as you continue pushing forward and learning and grasping, you're going to develop some ways to comprehend it. But just be prepared for that overwhelming feeling, because it's certainly going to happen. So here's an example. PCAP example. So one of the things I like to do when I'm first looking at PCAP, or say I'm dropped on a network and they say there's a compromise, is I want to start to look at DNS. DNS tends to be a really nice way, a treasure trove of information to get an idea of what types of communications are happening on this network. And I want to look for things that might be legitimate, but maybe it's misspelled to trick my eye, because that can be something that can be leveraged by some advanced malware. So in this little snippet, I'm using some command line kung fu, just to show you how I leverage, Linux, how it can be leveraged. A for-loop one-liner to go through the current directory, grab all the PCAP files, and throw them through TCP dump. Then I'm going to grab, I'm using a BPF filter for UDP and port 53 to match DNS traffic. And then I'm going to grep on, for host A queries with the grep there, a question mark. I'm going to print the second to last element in the line with awk, which is essentially the domain name. I'm going to sort unicum, which basically removes the duplicates and gives me a count. And this helps me get some context real quick about what types of communications are happening on the network. And take a second here and look at this output, starting at the bscorecardresearch.com. What domain in there looks legitimate, but is not? And I'll pause here for a second just so the people viewing can pause the video, maybe look at this before we move on. Okay, and if you didn't catch it, it is actually www.gmail.com as opposed to an L. You see how that can kind of trick the human eye if you're glancing through a lot of communications. That string might just look like might look like Gmail, but it's actually G-A-M-I. Your eyes play tricks on you, but it looks like that's made to look like Gmail. And here's the actual. So after you've saw that interesting DNS request, then you're going to dump on the host or the external domain IP and try to look at, all right, what is actually happening? What kind of communication is actually taking place? And in this example, this is the HTTP GET request. HTTP tends to be a pretty common protocol for malware command and control. And this is what we're going to see here is exactly that. We're seeing malware command and control, specifically related to the NetTraveler malware. You can imagine how it got its name based on the resource it's communicating with. But you can see that the host is that GAMI one.com. So it's made to look like Gmail, and it's clearly not. And if you dig into those parameters, you're going to see like host name, host IP, file name, file start, and that's pretty common for C2 is to communicate some information about the compromised host in what's called like a beacon, which essentially is like a heartbeat to the command and control server, because basically when you infect systems with malware, they have it beacon out to the command and control server. It's some sort of interval, maybe every hour, every 10 minutes, every minute, every few seconds, whatever it might be, and then they can click a button to essentially control that box as they see fit, or interact with that box a little more aggressively as they see fit. And this is an example of kind of a beacon for a piece of malware. And as you can see, this is kind of what you're looking for. This didn't flash red to you. It could look like a lot of gibberish. And if you don't know what you're looking for, this might just be like, well, it all looks like random stuff to me, right? So you got to start to train your eyes on what's normal and what's not, and then what are some indicators of compromise. All right, Zach?
So as we said before, and we'll say it again, is practice does make perfect. To the point where we made our own capture the flag virtual machine, and it should shortly be out on VulnHub, so keep an eye peeled for that. We'll probably make a post on our site for it as well. But with this, we're packaging a question and answer guide to kind of help you get your hands on the keyboard experience and truly lab and challenge yourself from an offensive and defensive perspective. Because what's better than just doing a capture the flag event? So let's recap everything we covered, and we covered a lot. So we'll start with, basically the first thing is the mindset, staying up to date with the latest news and trends. You can do this through, like we said before, Twitter, blogs, RSS feeds. It just ultimately, you always want to be in the know, and that is a truly powerful thing with InfoSec. We want you to build a lab, so create that virtual environment, test from an offensive or defensive perspective. Learn a scripting language or learn Python. It's a great one to kind of get your feet wet and just basically run with it and try and learn how to automate manual processes once you understand more of what manual processes you'll be doing in the InfoSec career you're going to pursue. Learn Linux. Even just moving around in Linux and knowing how to open files and edit files and go through them and grab items of interest is truly powerful with grep awkset and just doing the basic move around in a command line shell. Research and participate in capture the flags. We've just shown you that we're going to release our own, and you can go to other various forums, whether it's VulnHub or Pentest Labs or any other online forum, or you can go in person to an event. Sometimes there's B-side local events, big ones like DEF CON and Black Hat, of course. But if you don't have the funds, you can do this at home for free. Be aware that there's tons of online resources and technical training out there that's free. Feel free to give it a Google, look for it. Like we said before, Cyber IT is a great platform, and most of I believe all the resources are actually free. Try and find a mentor, so reach out. Don't feel like you're by yourself. Also, if you'd like to, you could always group together with other people that may be interested in going into this career path and truly trying to express yourself and learn with them, because it's always nice to not feel like you're isolated and by yourself. So try and find a mentor. Learn about job requirements. So learn about what's going to be required to do that defensive or offensive job, or what do I need to do, skill-wise, certification, educational background. Learn it and study up for it, and that way you have a very good, clear resume that can fit the job description. Develop a network. So in this age, social media is king, and if you have a LinkedIn profile or a Twitter, that is another thing that people will constantly look at in the field of InfoSec, and it's another way for you to learn and meet new people. So it's definitely something that we highly, highly suggest you do. Start your own blog. So whether, like we said before, if you want to get with a group of guys and create your own blog or make your own, it's truly another thing too that can kind of separate you from the pack and show that you not only are in the career or trying to be an InfoSec geek, but that you love it. And that's the true passion, is that you need to love your job and love it as a hobby as well, and that's what's really going to take you to the next level. And consider contributing, to an open source project. Go on a GitHub project and just start contributing. Try and add different things to somebody's idea already. Attend conferences, watch conferences, whatever you can do. If you don't have the monetary funds to go to one, watch them. They get released online on YouTube, or you can go to Iron Geek's site, and he releases a lot of different con talks that are really beneficial. And ultimately, what we want you to know is define your passion. And you always got to truly love what you're doing. So if you really do like that defensive perspective of hunting through PCAP, or if you want to try and pop a shell, or get offensive with the box, more than welcome to do either one. But just truly be passionate about what you're doing, because that will really make you a better and more skilled InfoSec professional. So here's a cover of some useful links. You can kind of just go through here and click them and whatever you'd like to do. But just to do a recap, brief recap, is Cyber IT, like we said, it's online resources, it's free. You got OWASP, you got the PTES, and SANS ISC, which are great guidelines, and they also give you a lot of different things of TTPs you can leverage in the field. You got VulnHub and Pentester Lab. Great hub for virtual machines and things to try and harden or attack. You have Metasploit Unleashed, which is a great pen tester mindset of learning how to navigate around and use Kali Linux and Metasploit. You have Iron Geek's YouTube channel, like we said, if you want to look at con talks, learn and adapt your skills. SecurityTube as well is another great platform to learn how to do various different things in offensive mindset mostly. We also have 2 other talks there that are really good. Feel free to view those. Various PCAP resources right there. You can download these PCAPs and analyze them in Wireshark or TCP dump. We also have the malware site where you could get malware signatures and you kind of do like forensics on them, or kind of learn more about malware. But if you do, tread lightly, because it can definitely get a little messy, and do it in a virtual environment. You can also look further into this podcast as well, and
yep, that's it. The last thing there is actually just InfoSec interview questions by ISD Podcast. So it's actually a dump of hundreds of common questions,
wow,
questions you'll get during an interview. So it's a very valuable link there to study up, now, and then by the time you go into an interview, you'll have a very good chance that you've already seen a question or a variant of that type of question. You'll be more prepared to answer it in an educated way. And that's it, guys. As we said earlier, we are big into helping others. So the whole Find the Mentor thing, we take that seriously. So if you want to have a mentor and you don't know who to talk to, you found one by listening to us. Like, definitely reach out to us. We'll help you if you have questions about what you've heard here. I know Zach, Luke, and I are all very passionate about this stuff. We really love it. And we enjoy helping others, so we're absolutely happy to help. Reach out to us via the website, Twitter, or the email address there, and we will get back to you and try to set up something where we can help you out and get you on a path to jumping into InfoSec.